Welcome to the Performance Science Podcast, and I'm your host, Michael Silvestri. To the Performance Science Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Silvestri, and I'll be taking you through the episodes leading through this podcast and video series. And today we'll be discussing the ideas about long-term athlete development, sport performance, and how we can help athletes throughout the high-performance landscape and throughout their sporting careers as youth. What it's important to understand first is getting into the knowledge of where the athlete falls on the spectrum. So as we can see from left to right here, we have ascending ages with our youngest athletes on the left-hand side and our oldest athletes on the right-hand side. But it's important to understand where the athlete will fit in on this spectrum. A lot of times coaches, parents, trainers are so worried about making the best 9-year-old or who's the best athlete at 9 years old. When if we take 9-year-olds, for example, in this graph here, we're looking at the fundamental stage. So it's all about creating fun within the sport, teaching them the fundamentals, the basics around the sport, but also teaching them to have fun and enjoy it, because sport is not only something that a very small percentage of athletes can turn into a career, but most importantly, it's something that carries with you through life, and everything you learn in sport carries with you through life. And as we progress, we see these different stages, right? So really the main part and the main idea of when we really start to compete at that highest level in our sport, and when we should really just focus in on becoming the best athlete we can be at that sport, is somewhere between the ages of 12 to 20, when we see that train to train, the train to compete stages, and then the train to win at 19 plus. It's important to understand that when we're younger and athletes are younger, it's just we need to push them to explore multiple stimulus. We need to push them to explore multiple sports. We shouldn't have them in this one silo of only playing soccer, only playing hockey. We should get that athlete to explore many different things, and that's going to make that athlete way better, well-rounded, but also make the athlete perform at higher levels within the given sport that they choose to train or train to compete at as they progress through the sporting landscape. So I think this graphic is very nice for people to understand where the athlete fits in. And most important, if we look at the end stage, it's not about training or playing pro, it's about being active for life. And we can enter this at any stage. And it shows that just being that active lifestyle as we can carry on through life is definitely the most important and needs to be the end goal with this continuum here of youth athlete development and long-term performance. When we talk about the sporting landscape and youth athletes, a lot of times it's all around the idea of who's the best 15-year-old, who's the best 16-year-old, and that's the athlete we need to dedicate all our time to. But that shouldn't be the case. We need to focus upon all athletes, and everyone's going to progress at different stages. Everyone hits puberty at different stages. Everyone hits their peak height velocity at different stages, which is the main growth period throughout their life. Everyone's going to go through different stages of growth and development, and not every athlete's going to progress linearly on the same path. So we need to produce and worry about focusing on making all athletes better, whether it's the middle of the pack athlete, the lower level athlete within the group, the higher level athlete. If we focus on making all the athletes within a given group better, this is going to help create overall higher level talent within that subgroup. And then this in turn will create high level talent of that 1% of athletes that do progress to play professional. We need to stop focusing all our time on who's the best athlete and focus our time rather on how do we make this group as a whole better, which will in turn make each individual athlete better. I think that's where the sporting landscape needs to go and where long-term athlete development needs to focus on in the coming years. Now, when we talk about optimal athletic development, there's many things that go into it, right? We can have playing multiple sports, tactical skills, physical literacy, and technical skills. When we talk about things like tactics, it's what's the systematics or the schematics involved with playing the game. Physical literacy, how physically fit or how physically agile is that individual athlete? Do they have the strength, the speed, the agility, the fitness to play that individual sport? And then when we get to the idea of technical skill, it all surrounds the idea of, can the athlete receive the pass in hockey? Can they kick the ball in soccer? Is there a skill with the ball, with the object in whatever sport they're playing, up to par, above, or below par with their age group? And then something that's really important, I feel, in athlete development is having exposure to multiple sports and multiple stimulus. It's very, very important. We don't want to seclude an athlete only to playing one sport throughout their life. all they're going to be end up doing if we play one sport is repetitive overload on the body, playing a singular sport. That athlete's not going to have the physical literacy to play multiple different sports and be an overall well-rounded athlete. We need to focus on making generalists, not specialists in the sporting landscape. Now, again, we need to shift that focus from making the best players better to making everyone better. And when we make everyone better in the sporting landscape in the long-term development of athletes, the overall quality of the athletic competition, events, and games will largely increase and the performance will increase. If we have a team of 10 athletes and we make all 10 athletes better versus just making that one superstar better, the whole team is going to progress better. The whole group is going to progress better. The whole group is going to develop better. And that's what we need as a whole. We need to bring the focus of long-term athlete development away from the singular aspect of, I only want my kid to be better, or we only want that 1% kid to be better. We need to focus on bringing everyone better. What are we doing in our training and our practice in our game that's going to make the team better as a whole, which in turn will allow each individual athlete to shine and be the spotlight in their own specific skills that they're very good at. That's where the focus of athlete development needs to go. And when we talk about athlete development, it's always important about where does our kid play? Where does the kid play his sport? Is he playing at the highest of level? And it's very important to understand there should be 3 different groups we want our athlete to play in. 25% of the time, the athlete should play in a level that's above their skill. 50% of the time at their skill level, and 25% of the time below their skill level. If we have our athlete always playing at a level that's at their skill, the athlete's going to become complacent, saying, I'm good enough, I can do this, I don't need to challenge myself. When we bring them to that level above for 25% of play, that's going to allow that athlete to see, okay, this is what it is at the next level. This is what it takes. This is how I need to progress myself. And they're going to be put in tougher situations in gameplay. Reverse, if we take that to below their skill level, the athlete's going to be able to excel a little more in that game. They're going to be allowed to progress themselves a little more. They're going to be allowed to develop a little more. They're going to get better at their technical skills involved with the sport. And this is, again, going to allow them to progress as a whole. So I think this is a very important aspect to learn with athlete development, and one that needs to be brought to the club level, the organizational level of playing games 50% at our skill level, 25% above, and 25% below, as this will really help optimize the overall athlete development of that given athlete. And we need to understand that not every athlete's going to go on to play pro. Not every athlete's going to go on to play college. When we look at how many athletes go on to play NCAA, roughly 7% of athletes will go on to play collegiate sports. And of that 7%, 2% will go on to play pro from the pool of athletes within collegiate sports. So we need to understand, and this brings back to our first slide, we talked about the graphic of our active for life. A very, very small percentage of athletes will go on to play collegiate sports, and even a smaller percentage will go on to play pro. So it's all about teaching habits and being active for life, and it's a lifestyle. It's not just about teaching our athlete because we want them to become pro. Yes, that may be our goal for some athletes, but we need to come to a realization that not every athlete we work with is going to go play college or turn pro. It's more about teaching them habits for life, and how are you going to make an impact on that athlete's life in the future. As a whole, we need to avoid early sports specialization. So this brings back the topic of being a generalist, not a specialist. You should expose your athlete to multiple different sports, multiple different stimuli, whether that's playing basketball and strength training and playing soccer in the summers, or playing hockey and golf. Exposing them to many different things is going to allow that athlete to become whole better as a whole level, as opposed to singularly in one sport. Another aspect we need to understand with early sports specialization and only specializing in one sport, 30% of youth athletes will suffer from something we call overtraining syndrome. Overtraining syndrome is when the athletes worked too much and pushed too hard, whether it's playing one sport, playing multiple sports, but the athlete's going to be at a higher risk for injury. They're not going to develop better. They're not going to perform better. They're not going to be able to train at their optimal levels. And with 30% of youth athletes suffering from overtraining syndrome, that's a large quantity of athletes within a given sport. That means if we have a team of 10, that's 3 players who are suffering from overtraining syndrome. And if those 3 players are all injured, that puts a damper on the team and on the squad. So it's important to understand that we need to be optimizing our load and our workload for youth athletes. And we need to really work to avoid this overtraining syndrome and how we negatively affect youth athletes by continuously pushing them in only one sport and making them a specialist versus being a generalist. So we need to focus more on being a generalist and not a specialist. Now, the parents is often a role that's overlooked in youth athletes and the youth athlete landscape, but I think this is an important video that I want to show that takes home the message of how important the parent is in the role of youth athletes.
not your best practice. Can we agree on that? It seemed like you wanted to hang out with your friends more than practice. And that's fine if that's what you want to do. Just tell me. Because you can do that anytime. Maybe we can skip your next game. Because choosing to waste your time, that's one thing. But wasting my time and your coach's time, that's selfish. You don't care about other people. You don't care about hard work. You don't care about teamwork. That's why you're always on the bench, every time it matters. Just think you're selfish. Soccer coach, football coach, everyone does. So, if you want to keep playing, you need to take a good hard look at yourself and think about that.
Now, with this video, it's important to understand, and I think a lot of us can sympathize with this and feel the emotions that kid's feeling in the back of the car, where maybe that's someone we know, that's a friend, maybe that was us as a youth, or maybe that's us right now as a youth athlete. And the parents and the role of the parent, the guardian, it's important to understand the words you say, how you act, how you interact with your child after their sport. It can have a large negative impact on them and on their development and on their sport, and most importantly, on their mental health. It's important to understand as parents, your role is to be a parent, not to be a coach. The car ride home, the athlete doesn't want to engage in what happened in their game and hear you bicker and get mad at them, or hear you be condescending towards them. They want you to be their parent. Most importantly, you're the parent of that athlete. You're not the coach of that athlete. And that's the fine line we need to draw in youth sports. The parents need to be able to check themselves out and take a step back. This is the youth athlete who's playing their sport. This is not the parent living vicariously through their kid to play their sport. This is something we need to understand. And I think this is a large change that needs to take place within the sporting landscape. We see this happen too often, parents pushing their kids too hard on their kids. And like the data shows in the video, 70% of kids will quit sports before high school. But we need to have that active for life. And a lot of times it's not because the kid doesn't want to play. They just don't want to deal with their parents and this car ride home phenomenon that we discussed in this video shows. So I think this is a very important aspect that needs to be understood by parents, by youth, by coaches, and does not need to be overlooked. Now, when we go from here, where we move the youth athlete landscape, it's very important to understand. There's 5 points we want to discuss. Having our athlete be exposed to multiple stimulus, playing multiple sports, being involved in different environments. And 2, we don't want to worry about our kid being the best. Ultimately, 7% of kids will go on to play college, and 2% from college will go on to play pro. The odds of your kid being the best, I'm sorry, are very unlikely. So you need to worry about what are we doing for your kid to make him active for life, those habits we want to create for long-term development. It's not about my kid turning pro, because the athletes that do turn pro is a small percentage of the athlete pool within your area or within your country. And we want to put the athlete in a situation to develop. So that goes back to the 50% of your skill level, 25% above, 25% below. How is the athlete going to develop differently in all 3 of the scenarios? And how's that going to help the athlete in the long-term game of developing and hopefully going on to play at the collegiate level? Number 4, parents being parents only. It's very, very important to learn as a parent, check yourself out from the sport, stop trying to live vicariously through your kid, and be a parent only. That is one of the most important things you can do as a parent. And most importantly, make sure your kid is having fun. That has to be the most important attribute of long-term athlete development and sport performance. If the athlete is not having fun, ultimately they're going to quit, they're going to burn out, they're not going to like the sport anymore, and they're going to have resentment towards all the people involved in it that push them to be involved in that sport. So number 5 is the most important, have fun. Now that brings us to the end of episode 1. And I thank you for listening to episode 1 of Long-Term Athlete Development and Performance Science podcast. I'm your host, Michael Silvestri. We'll be back. I'm going to do episodes monthly, so stay tuned. We'll see you in another episode next month. If you need to contact me, reach out to me. You can head over to my website. You can read some blog posts, get in touch with me via email. But most importantly, thank you guys for listening. Take care, and we'll talk soon.